Hello everyone, my name is John. I'm the founder and director of UniTasterDays, and a warm welcome to this event. Whether you're joining us live on the UniTaster Tuesday events or watching back on the UniTaster On Demand video hub, I hope you find this event really useful. Today, we're going to be introducing university interviews, and I'm joined by two exceptional speakers to talk about that very subject. I'm joined by Ruth from the University of Winchester. Ruth is a Schools and Colleges Development Officer, and I'm also joined by Bronwen from the University of South Wales, and Bronwen is a Student Recruitment Officer. How we're going to split today, and in terms of your time with this event, will last for about 35-40 minutes, I reckon. Ruth's going to open things up talking about preparing for university interviews. So Ruth might therefore mention tips about virtual interviews. It might also include maybe some subject specific tips, but very much in advance of a university interview. And then Bronwen is going to follow Ruth and talk about what to expect on the day and some tips as far as university interviews on the day as well. I'll pass things straight over to Ruth. Ruth is joining us from the University of Winchester. And over to you, Ruth. Thank you.
Hi, brilliant, thank you. So I have just got a few slides to kind of whip through, to go through and explain a little bit about how you can kind of best prepare yourself for when you kind of get started in terms of thinking about what it is you want to be doing on your particular interview. Now, it will depend on perhaps exactly the course you've applied for. So generically, I'm kind of talking about a range of different courses, but there are some as we go further forward that are perhaps a bit more specific. And I'll give you some details on kind of what some of those specific kind of degrees might be looking for as well. So what we do know is that this year's been a bit different and slightly more interesting. And what that means is from a kind of interview sort of perspective is that the universities are having to do things a little bit differently this year. What that means is actually we do know that students have had disruption. We know that actually perhaps there have been impacts in terms of being able to do placements as part of your programs this year. But what we do know is applicants are in a similar position. And when we're calling you to interview, that already means that we've got some kind of good knowledge that the information you've given us about the qualifications you're taking or the experiences you have got are interesting enough for us to want to take you for interview. So what I would say is do approach your interview really positively. It's really successful that you've got to that kind of stage. And it is important to make sure that you are remaining positive during that interview and in terms of how you're thinking about it. Don't assume everybody's got one. That might not be the case. We are really still trying to kind of decide who best to take forward. And the fact you've got to that stage is a kind of really positive in terms of where you are already. So there are different types of interview, and in normal years, these might be slightly different. Universities would use them in slightly different ways. This year, what we're going to see maybe a little bit more of is kind of the one-to-one and virtual interviews that are taking place online. I do know that there are some courses that are using things like sort of group and team interviews still, depending on the subject. So it is really important that when you get those details so that you've got an interview, that you read through them really carefully so that you understand the type of interview that you're going to be kind of up against as part of your application. Most of them are taking a little bit less time. You're not having to travel to the university in quite the same way. But what they could be is quite intense kind of 20-30 minutes of conversation where you need to kind of be ready to justify your ideas. And I'll give you some tips on that as well as we go further forward. So group interviews are happening in some situations. And this is where they need to understand, or that program needs to be able to see how you work with other people. So it might be perhaps things like teaching or education, kind of health-based careers as well, where they want to be able to see how you work with and engage with other people. Now, in a group situation, more generally, when you're in a kind of classroom or kind of round a table, that on its own can be quite tricky. So in kind of an online group interview, it might be that there are certain kind of, I guess, rules or parameters that the tutor, that the supervisor would give you for those group discussions. It might also be quite important to make sure that you kind of have practiced in terms of being able to get your opinion across in that kind of group environment, because it is a slightly different way of working. And certainly you're having to kind of suddenly collaborate with other people that you've maybe not met before, but they're testing that you have those kind of rapport skills. And certainly if you've banged on about how much communication skill you've got in your personal statement, that's what we're going to want to certainly see in that group interview situation. The other types of things that we are doing, and I know universities are doing this in slightly different ways this year, we're trying to perhaps give you a source or a situation. So where we maybe know a group interview isn't going to work online, maybe for that programme, they may be giving you a case study or example or something for you to prepare before you get to that interview. That's really helpful. You will often get that several days before your interview. What isn't happening though is universities aren't perhaps giving that out 4 or 5 weeks in advance. So they're not giving you kind of weeks and weeks to prepare. They might send that out to you 3 or 4 days before your interview is due to take place. So it's important to make sure that if you think that might be something that they're going to send you, make sure that you look out for it. It's not gone in your junk mail, but also make sure that actually you've given yourself enough time to prepare for whatever that situation is. And it might be a case study or source that they want you to read, and there's a couple of questions they're certainly going to ask you about that. So it's important to make sure you know if that's something that's coming your way in terms of what the universities are going to ask for you to do. What's most common though this year is to have kind of an online discussion with somebody. It might be that they've got a couple of members of their team, maybe someone from their recruitment team and an academic who's going to be kind of on the other end of that call. It might be that they want to record those and they will then be able to kind of review and look back at your interview as well. They're likely to be quite short, sort of more than 15 minutes, but no longer than kind of maybe 45 minutes. And it really is so they can get a flavour of who you are, what you're about, and that you have chosen perhaps the right course. What is really important is if for whatever reason you can't make that online interview and you've been sent those details, please contact the universities to rearrange them. We don't know by kind of telepathy that you maybe aren't available at 4 o'clock on that day because you are catching the bus back from college or whatever it might be. So it is important to make sure that when you've been sent those details and you know when it is, that if you can or can't attend, you get in touch with the university and let them know straight away. There are some fantastic positives of being able to do things online. It's kind of new for everyone. So in universities, our academics and tutors have obviously been working online over the last few months. And actually, I think we've probably all got a bit better at, making sure that we are online and kind of using the technology that's there. But it might be a platform you don't know before. So again, it's important to make sure you're checking your IT. They're sort of less awkward. You're not having to do kind of weird handshakes. You're not sure which seat to sit in. You're kind of in one place and ready to go when you get there, which is kind of quite nice. What it does mean is you can have your notes with you. Now, there's those classic kind of memes in various different places of, what you see on the screen and what's happening in the background in someone's house is something completely different. So actually, you're able to kind of show your best self in that sense in terms of in that online meeting. And actually, once you're finished, you can reflect on it really quickly. So once you've finished that online interview, you can actually kind of debrief, think about what's happened and do that quite quickly rather than having to maybe go on and then do a tour or go around and do something else on the campus. So it is slightly different and it gives you that opportunity to kind of really show your potential in the time frame that you've been given. What is important to bear in mind is if you're still at a kind of school or college, so you're undertaking study at the moment, and maybe you are, sometimes you're doing blended learning, so you might be in school or college or not. Those people in school or college don't know you've got an interview. They might not know what time it is exactly unless you tell them. So I know loads of schools are being really helpful and, heads of sixth form are giving over their office so that students can do their interview. So make sure that people at school know if you have an interview at a time where actually you need to be set up in school or college to be able to do that. Again, in terms of where you're doing it, make sure you've got your data's working on your phone or device you're using. There's nothing worse than running out of data when you really need the Wi-Fi to be working. Make sure you're testing all your IT so you know exactly what you're doing before you start. And obviously kind of closing anything down that might mean that you're kind of jerky or jumping on the screen so that actually you're kind of showing off your best self when they can see you in terms of what you're up to. So kind of before you get started, certainly check the interview details, check what time it is, make sure you've not made any mistakes. I think what universities are doing is they're perhaps sending you an appointment slot maybe 2 or 3 weeks before, but they're perhaps giving you the definite details maybe only 7 days or 4 or 5 days before the interview. So make sure you're just aware that they're doing that. Very often they're telling you that in the interview. Read that information really carefully. Obviously, you can read through your own application, check the information you've given them on your personal statement and your reference to make sure that what you're sharing with them kind of is the most relevant information for you. And if you're not sure, then get other people to test you. If there's certain bits of software you've not used before, you've got time before you get started to kind of make sure that you know what you're doing when you get there. Now, this year we know work experience hasn't been possible for lots of programmes, and certainly at interview they're not necessarily expecting you to list all the work experience that you haven't been able to do. What is important is in this stage you can name check anything you've got planned. So if you have a particular placement that you're due to do before you're going to start university, then let us know about that. And it might be that you perhaps need to think about before you get to interview how you are going to show off some of those skills that you need for your particular career area. So thinking about your own experiences, what you've studied, maybe any part-time employment, what you've seen going on this year with things like COVID taking place. So it's important perhaps before you get there to have a think about what you're going to say to be able to reflect your skills from the experiences that you have got and can share. One of the other things students will often forget to do is actually check the details of the degree they've applied for. And I know that sounds really obvious because you've applied for it and you know that's what you want to go and do. But I would check and go through because courses are different. The placements might be different. Certainly if you're applying for maybe health-based courses, how much kind of assessment, what that assessment's going to look like, what the different settings are going to be like, so that you can really identify so that when you are then in that interview, you're able to talk about their course really specifically. And the universities will like that in terms of being able to share, kind of showing off that you know the details for their particular programme. And what is important as well is obviously not always every part of your degree is going to be brilliant. So there might be parts of the job you're going to maybe find hard or difficult. And it might be that they're going to ask you about that as well. So not just about maybe the positives, but think about maybe what you might find difficult or you're going to maybe struggle with as part of that course, because it's important to have those kind of answers prepared before you start. Challenges certainly are something that you might be asked about, and we're looking at you maybe reflecting on what's been going on. So certainly for health-based courses or education-based courses, there's been a lot of change in the last few months. So we don't expect you to know everything about all of these things, but it might be that you can reflect on and draw upon what has been going on. We've seen an increase in kind of news reports of people with mental health concerns. People have been isolated during lockdown. So it's important to make sure that you're doing some of that prep work beforehand, so that if you get one of those questions, you kind of know where you want to go with it in your interview as you're doing that live. Also actually kind of know what's going on. So, we've had some news is changing all the time. They're not going to pick anything too tricky, but we want to have an understanding that you know what is going on. And it might be that you are being asked, certainly for health courses, about wider health issues. It might be in terms of education. You're talking about things to do with maybe behaviour management of children, because actually, parents have had a lot of kind of childcare responsibility, a bit more through lockdown, and actually how has that had an impact perhaps on boundary setting or what's going on then in the classroom. So it is important to know what's going on and reflect on that. Certainly news channels are really useful. Certainly, a couple of days before your interview, make sure you see what's going on. You wouldn't want to have your interview, I think, if the vaccines have started or something's happened that day, you want to make sure you know what that is so that you can name check it and talk about it in your interview. And particularly for NHS courses, we are looking for you to demonstrate those core values. So we don't mind if you've necessarily watched TV. You might be coming to that with knowledge of reading or things that you've looked at rather than work experience. But it is important to remind yourself of what those values are so that you can make sure that you're highlighting those during your interview. And again, university websites will share information about that. So if there is stuff you're supposed to know before you get there, make sure you know what that is, but also actually that you've given yourself enough time to research it so that you can sound competent when you're in that maybe 20-30 minute interview. So kind of finally, really, for this section, do your homework. Make sure you know what skills they want from you and look at that in good time. It might be you need to think about your own strengths and weaknesses. Sometimes there can be questions there about, what do you think you're going to find difficult? And it's important to maybe reflect on that and have an answer before you get into the virtual room, if you like. Again, all universities trying to make it as easy as possible. We want you to be successful at interview. We don't want to make these difficult situations, but we will send you quite detailed information, and they might be different university to university. So read through it carefully, make sure you've understood it, maybe get someone else to read through those emails that they're sending you, just so you have a really clear idea that you've understood the requirements that they're asking for from you really clearly, to make sure you know what's going to be expected of you. And certainly if you have had a couple of interviews and you've completed them online, don't forget to kind of reflect on that. You're in a perfect opportunity to be able to kind of scribble things down as soon as you finish. It might even be that you decide to have someone in the room with you who's not distracting you, listening, kind of writing down the questions they ask you. So when you come to the second or third interview, you've kind of already done that preparation and been able to reflect on those questions. And think about how you might prepare best. You might be someone who's better at kind of just reading through information. It might be there's some great apps on phones and things. You can audio record yourself kind of going through some practice questions. And it might be you do that and go, gosh, I just didn't answer that very well, or I kept coming back to communication skills and I need to think maybe a bit more broadly. So think about how you might prepare best, and don't assume kind of your competition haven't prepared. They're a great opportunity if you've kind of done your homework and made sure you know what you can talk about to really show off and sell during that interview. And that's exactly what the universities want. It is your opportunity to really just show off and show us what you know, so we can hopefully successfully offer you a position. Okay, fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Ruth joining us from the University of Winchester. Really a brilliant introduction to preparing for university interviews, Ruth. Really, really grateful for that. And I love the subject tips linking to health courses, which I'd imagine would often have interviews on them. So very grateful for that. Our second speaker is Bronwen. Bronwen is joining us from the University of South Wales, and Bronwen's going to talk about more on the day of an interview and what to expect when you actually arrive, and some top tips on that basis. So Bronwen, with that, I'll pass over to you, please.
Thank you very much, John. Hi, everyone. My name is Bronwen from the University of South Wales. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples of maybe potential questions that could be asked on the day of your interview, as well as some tips. So during the whole process, you know this, but the one thing to keep in mind is that why you are in this position. You have applied for a course or maybe even a job position, so you have already impressed the application tutors with your personal statement. So things are already looking positive. This is just your opportunity now to seal the deal and talk about your skills and experiences in more detail. So any information that you give during the interview should remain relevant to that. Always have that end goal in mind that you want to place on that particular course. So on the day of the interview, it's very natural. You may feel a little bit nervous, but everyone is in the same position. Try to relax a little, and sometimes that adrenaline can actually make you perform slightly better. So be prepared, make sure your device is set up. If you're using a laptop or whatever, make sure your desk is nice and neat and tidy, have some water nearby. And if you're allowed to use resources and notes on the day, make sure that they're out ready, and that if you're doing a presentation, that it is ready to go. We've been in many situations where it's quite awkward, oh, let me just share the screen, let me get my presentation up. So there's a natural delay there, but just make sure that it's all open and ready to go. So this obviously is a chance to make a first impression. Apparently, panelists will make quite a solid decision within 7 seconds of meeting you. So, come with an air of positivity from the get-go. Arrive on time, obviously. Join the call at your allocated time if it is an online interview, or earlier if possible. Try to avoid interruptions. I know it's inevitable sometimes. My dog barks quite often. There's always a DPD driver here, but just maybe try and set yourself in a different room where it's going to be a little bit more quiet, and make sure you've got the right meeting link to join. I would say dress appropriately as well. For a university course, that doesn't necessarily mean, shirt and tie or office wear, but just the usuals, as long as you're clean and tidy and it's a bit old-fashioned, but make sure, your clothes aren't creased or stained, the usuals there. So panelists will usually introduce themselves first. So they'll probably give a little bit of a background to their roles. Obviously, you can't shake hands in an online environment, so you'll just have to make an extra conscious effort to, express that you're pleased to meet everyone and you're happy to be there, and just be generally polite. They might open with quite a general question, what we call an icebreaker question. So one that, I've come across several times is, tell me about yourself. That is a classic opening question. So what I would avoid, I could say, my name is Bronwen, I'm 18, I was born in Cardiff, I have 2 sisters, I have a dog, I'm in 6th form, I'm studying this, this and this. Please avoid that. We know who you are, of course, we know your name, we know why you're here. We don't necessarily want your life story. That question can be so open-ended and very difficult. So what I would say is just be a lot more focused. Like I said, remember why you're there. You're applying for a certain course. So open with something to do with that course. So, okay, tell me about yourself. I have been passionate about technology for many years, for example. I used to spend my spare time coding apps during college. I attended hackathons where I worked with other developers. From my research, I can see that this course has modules in software development, and I'm excited to develop my knowledge here. So already you're focusing on the course or the job you're applying for. So make sure it's relevant to why you're there. Also consider body language. Again, it's quite difficult behind a screen, but little things like, I might be doing it now, but if you notice you're talking too fast because you're nervous, take a deep breath, try and slow it down a little bit, ease the tension in your body, try and sit up straight, maybe lean forward a little bit to show that you're engaged. If you're back in your seat, if you're shrinking a little bit, that then is a reflection of how you're feeling, isn't it? Eye contact, again, very difficult online. So that's why these little gestures are more important. If you agree with something the panelists said, you might have to just nod a little bit harder so they understand that you understand. And try not to fidget as well. Avoid, touching your face. Maybe keep your hands on your lap to avoid that. So another question panelists love to ask, which is very open-ended, is, what do you consider to be your strengths and weaknesses? Now, it's not a trick question. No one is trying to catch you out. But what you should avoid is saying, oh, I don't have any weaknesses, because, no offense, it's not true. What a lot of people tend to do as well is maybe turn a weakness or show a strength as a weakness. So, oh, I care too much. I work too hard. I'm a perfectionist. I want to get everything 100% right all the time. Now, the point of this question is actually to encourage you to explain how you're working to overcome your weaknesses. It won't be held against you. It's just seeing how you form an answer to that question. Everyone has weaknesses, and if you don't acknowledge you have weaknesses, you appear, that you're not very self-aware, and that's not particularly a good trait to have if you're going to university or applying for a job. A more positive way of turning that, into a good answer would be something like, okay, so I have a hard time sharing tasks with others because I'm always convinced that I can do it all on my own. This has led me to feeling overwhelmed in the past, and it hasn't been easy learning to let go, but I've been working on trusting others and sharing the responsibilities for the project. So you're acknowledging you've got a weakness, but also you're showing that you're working on it. And also, don't be negative when you're asking questions. Some people might say, oh, I have no weaknesses. Some people might turn it into a bit of a therapy session and start listing all their weaknesses. Now, you've got to be careful there, especially consider the job or the course you're applying for. For example, if you're applying for something in healthcare, maybe it's not best to mention that, okay, oh, I'm squeamish, or I get flustered under pressure easily. Focus on a weakness that doesn't disqualify you from the course or job you're applying for. So that would be my advice there. Another question that's often asked as well is, where do you envision this course leading you? What do you want to do after you graduate? Or where do you see yourself in 10 years? So this answer should demonstrate that you've got some sort of goal or ambition. You know, you've invested in higher education. So the panelists want to see what your sort of goal is in the future. Maybe you want to specialize in a particular area. Maybe you want to go into a certain career. I mean, no one is going to check up on you in 10 years' time and say, oh, Jon said he wanted to do this and he's not. But it does show that you've put some thought into your education and the pathway to your future. Many questions are also based on competencies. So I've asked people in the before, okay, describe a situation where you collaborated successfully. And what did you do to ensure it was a success? So you'll have to talk about your own experiences, whether it's within education or your personal life or during your extracurricular activities. But remember to describe that skill and try and link it back to the course you're applying for. So you'll talk about your real life scenarios, and then the interviewer then obviously understands you better, they understand your thought process, and it's a great opportunity to assess your skills. So for example, to link it back to the course, if you're applying for something like social work, you could say, well, I will have to collaborate, you know, with parents, guardians, teachers, health professionals as part of this course. So my real life scenario will help with this. Try to avoid going off on tangents. So again, try and keep it quite specific to your skills, the course you're applying for. Like we said, we are interested in you, definitely, but we don't want to hear your entire life story. Many questions are also situational based. So, for example, we'll give you an example like, you can't complete a project because you're waiting on a member of your team to complete a task. What do you do? So giving you a hypothetical question that you might ask. So although it's hypothetical, I would suggest that you draw on your own experiences as well and talk about the skills here. I mean, a main question, everything is going to be based around why you want to follow that particular subject or course. So make sure everything is linked here. So be prepared to answer questions as well based on your personal statement. That is what's got you to this position in the first place. So read over it a few times before the actual interview. So basically, this is a chance to elaborate on the points you've already made. Someone might say, right, so I've got my personal statement in your personal statement in front of me. It says here that you researched into the effects of social media on mental health. Can you tell me more about this? So you may have included quite a small section within your personal statement. This is an opportunity to talk about what research methods you used, what you discovered, how this will help you going on in the future, and how, again, it might link to the course you want to follow. Other questions we could ask might be something to do with your A-levels. So is there anything you've particularly enjoyed about studying this subject at school or college? What do you consider to be your biggest achievement? And again, achievements are so personal. That doesn't mean, oh, I've won an award. They could be, you know, small achievements, but they're really important to talk about yourself in a positive light. And of course, why do you want to study this subject? If you struggle at any moment during the interview, you know, my mind goes blank on a daily, that's absolutely fine. Okay, the interviewers realize this is quite a nerve-wracking experience. So if your mind goes blank and you can't answer a question, just say, you know, oh, can we come back to that question? Or do you mind if we move on? If you want to bide some time, take a sip of water, take a deep breath. You don't have to bask in that awkwardness. If there's genuine silence and you can't think of anything to say, just ask nicely, can we move on? And they should understand. So at the very end of the interview, there's often a chance to ask your own questions. I would say make the most of this opportunity because you're getting free one-to-one advice, essentially, from professionals who work at universities. So the experts are in the room or in the virtual room with you. And asking questions does show your interest in the course as well and in them as people. So it's a two-way street. You asking questions means you get to assess the university as well. You know, it's not just them assessing you. You're allowed to come to your own conclusion and see if they meet your expectations. So certain questions you could ask if you are interested is maybe, okay, what projects have students been involved with on this course? Which employers do you work with? What's the work experience like? What are the facilities like? What careers have graduates gone into? Again, which shows that you've got that future goal in mind. So these hints and tips are relevant to university interviews, but they're also transferable to job interviews as well. So everyone at some point in their life will have to talk about themselves in a positive light and have to, sell themselves. So please use this information regardless of what path you choose to go down. The goal is to show yourself in a good light and highlight why your skills match the job description. So like I said, you've already passed stage 1, read the personal statement and are really impressed. This is just to seal the deal now. So yeah, believe in yourself, be positive, and good luck. Thank you.
Thank you, Bronwen. That was another excellent session today. I think we're all definitely going to get jobs as well as university places in the future. Some brilliant tips, and I think loads of people watching could relate to loads of those, particularly about the questions. Get a few questions. Don't do what loads of people do and get to the end and they'll say, have you got any questions? And they say, all my questions have been answered already. Everyone does that. Avoid it. Get loads of questions to make sure you have the opportunity to A, show interest, and B, get your questions answered. Really, really grateful to our 2 speakers today for 2 exceptional presentations. That was Ruth Boyce, who opened things up from the University of Winchester, and then Bronwen, who just spoke then from the University of South Wales on very much the on the day tips. Sorry. As far as access to other events, do check out UniTasterDays.com/Tuesdays, where this video and videos from previous events will all be made available to you. But the final thing for me to do is just to say thank you very much for listening and enjoy the rest of the week. Take care. Thank you.